Hi there, my name is Ron Rogers, and I'm going to tell you about a very interesting individual that I had the privilege of working together with when I was out at the Air Force Flight Test Center out at Edwards. I was stationed there as a pilot from 77 to 79. I met George as a captain. Now, George and I both had our offices in the Air Force Test Pilot School. I was senior flight examiner in Wing Stanivel, and he was an instructor at the Test Pilot School. And I first started to meet George, other than just casually running into him in the hallway, when we were taking a class together. The University of California at Fresno offered master's degree courses, and a lot of the pilots on base took them. And although George taught an aerodynamics course to get college credit for it, master's credit, he actually had to take the course from USC. So we're in this course together, and I had been out of academics for like 7 years. So the instructor, who was an interesting guy, he was an instructor at the Test Pilot School, and a lot of these guys were. In fact, one time the commandant of the Test Pilot School instructed in this course a little bit while the main instructor was out, but I digress. Okay. But anyway, we're taking this course, and I am writing notes feverishly because I'd been out for a while. And George leans over to me and says, don't you just hate it when they cover all this simple crap? Can't we just get on the material? I go, yeah, George. I'm writing just feverishly there, trying to get everything down, trying to get back up to speed. But George, absolutely brilliant guy. So we kind of got to know each other, and we're out in the back of this building. If you could look through the building, there's a parking lot. That's where we all parked in back, and I came out after work, and George out there working on his car. He's got the hood up, and we just start chit-chatting, and George starts telling me a little bit about his past. And I don't think a lot of the people who have worked with George know this, because my co-pilot, who was the Thunderbird lead for 2 years before he got that position, had worked for George, and he wasn't aware of this story. But George's career almost ended before it ever began. Well, George was thinking ahead, and he wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. I mean, if you're going to go in the Air Force, you're going to be a pilot, you want to go through the academy, of course. I was going to be a nuclear physicist. My dad didn't like me to be an Air Force pilot. He had been a World War II forward air controller, and, so that wasn't going to be my thing. But I later decided and went into ROTC, like a lot of people who don't have their act together early on. But George wanted to go in. He wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. So he goes through the whole process. He gets selected. He's out there taking his physical. Well, George had had a football injury in high school, and he had damaged his knees. And he was almost through the physical, and this is the story as George relates it. It was just enthralling. He was almost through the physical, and the doctor looks over him. He's a little suspicious, and he says, "Do a deep knee bend for me." So George goes down and can't get back up because of his knee injury. So the doctor looks at him, says, "I'm sorry, son, but you can never be an Air Force pilot." So, all right, George's dream is ruined. He's dejected, but he decides he's not giving up. Now, back when I was doing skydiving, and I do another one of these presentations mentioning I was the president and founder of the Iowa Parachute Team, but back then we jumped surplus military chutes, and we modified them for the ability to steer them with various modifications, double L and stuff like that. But these were not very good chutes, and George decided that he was going to take up skydiving because he wanted to get into Air Force ROTC then. He decided he'd go another route. So he took up skydiving because he figured nobody would ever question his knees if he told him he was a skydiver. So he gets in the Air Force ROTC program down at the University of Illinois. He goes through it, and he graduates as a pilot candidate, and he goes through pilot training in 1968. And George does very well in pilot training. He ends up getting assigned to the F-4 as a fighter pilot, and has quite a number of missions over in Southeast Asia. But on one mission, he was shot down. So he bails out. He gets on the ground. He's got the standard issued .38 caliber revolver, and he's firing, and the enemy troops are getting close, and he's firing, and he's talking on his radio to the rescue helicopter. And he tells them that, they're all around me. You got to get in close, get in real close, because they're all around me and I'm shooting at them and stuff like that. And he starts to feel the breeze from the helicopter coming in. He says, you got to get close, got to get close. And all of a sudden he feels something brush against his leg. And he looks down, and it's a skid of the Huey helicopter. And he looks up, and he sees this big hand just reach out of the helicopter. It grabs him in the middle of his flight suit, rips him up, pulls him into the helicopter, and off they go. Well, because he was shot down, he has to take a physical to get back on flight status. So he goes through the physical, and the doctor says, yep, you're in fine shape. You can go back flying. And George was happy, and he says to the flight surgeon, he says, by the way, do you remember me? Because George remembered the flight surgeon. This was the flight surgeon who had given him the physical at the academy and told him he would never again, he would never be an Air Force pilot. And he just cleared him to fly again. So that was an interesting story about how a guy turned a rejection, an end of a career situation, into a win. Now, obviously, he kind of faked his knee situation, but it certainly didn't harm him because he had an absolutely amazing career. Now, another interesting part of this story is down in test ops, George is on the telephone, and he is having a rather vehement argument with somebody that he is not going to go to the Air War College. We had a lot of schools that were good for your career, like Squadron Officer School. And you could go and take it. I did it correspondence, and it was built for insomniacs, because I know Henry Kissinger was a brilliant person, but you sat there, you reading his works, and I was gone. I kept having to wake myself up to get through that course. And I'm sure George took it correspondence too, but as you got up there, they wanted you to go to the higher level courses, and he was telling the guy, he says, no, you don't understand. I am not going. Take me out of the class. I'm not going. I'm not leaving here. He says, I'm not going to the course. And he did not go to the course. He refused it. He was involved in a lot of test work. And he said to me, he says, if they're going to kick me out of the Air Force, fine. I can get plenty of good jobs. But no, he stayed in. And actually, one of the things he was involved in, there's the little Red Hats patch. And I will read from what is published, because this was a real secret adventure at the time, so to make sure I don't say anything wrong. George Muellner joined and then later commanded the 6513th Test Squadron, known as the Red Hats, where he was involved in obtaining and testing Soviet-designed combat airplanes used for technical evaluations to provide high-fidelity air combat training for U.S. fighter pilots. That's what's published, and that's all I'll mention, but he was involved in that, and while I was out there at the time. Now, like I said, later he did go to the Air War College, and Steve, who was my co-pilot, I told Steve this story about how he refused, and Steve says, you're kidding me, because he was pressuring me that I needed to go to that school, and to know that he was absolutely objecting to it. Well, I said, well, he did finally go to it. Now, George had a very distinguished career with the Air Force. He retired in '98 at the rank of Lieutenant General, and he won all sorts of various awards and that are listed on the papers here. But one thing that we shared in common, and I'd like to mention, was George. After he retired, he became head of the Phantom Works for Boeing. And he had won in 1991 and 94 the Aviation Week Laureate Award. Now, I won it in 98 for my work on aircraft protections and pilot authority. I received Best Technical Paper of the Year award from the Society of Experimental Test Pilots. And at the annual symposium where they hand out that award, I had my normal table, which was way in the back, that I was sitting at. And the Boeing guys invited me to sit at their table right up in front. And I guess because I was getting the award or I'd worked with them or whatever. But anyway, I'm sitting there at the Boeing table, and my wife and I are sitting next to George. So that was a fun time visiting with him. But that was the last time that I remember that I ran into George. But anyway, he died at the age of 75, which is unfortunate because that's, now that I'm approaching 74, that's way too young. But he had an absolutely distinguished career, and I wanted to bring out something that I think a lot of people may not know the story about George, that he related to me personally, about how his Air Force career almost was short-circuited before it ever began, and he proved to be an extremely valuable asset. I wonder how many other people are shortchanged like this, or we, the Air Force and the country, are shortchanged by not getting their skills because they're rejected. But George fought it, kind of like Ted Sturmthal when I talked about him, fought extremely difficult odds and succeeded and had very good careers. Thanks for watching. I hope you found it interesting.